Hello, I am the chosen one, and I am here in the Sandbox Interactive Studios. I have been here all week, and I have had the great pleasure of hanging out with all the developers, and they're giving me the opportunity to do some interviews. And right now I'm getting to interview one of my favorite people here. I get to interview David, the CTO of Albion Online and one of the founders of Sandbox Interactive. You've been here forever.
13 years, yes. Almost forever. half of my professional career. I've been in this industry for almost 25 years, if you can believe that. I started as a student. It was a side hustle when I was still at university. And yeah, I've been doing this for 13 years now.
That's amazing. I don't, this wasn't in the plan, but you want to tell me a little bit about what it was like as a student getting into the games industry while you were still here, trying to be like, okay, let's make a little extra scratch.
Something like that. No, I've always wanted to be a game developer, believe it or not, right? So I've been in love with computer games ever since the very beginning. And I have to say, I'm from East Germany, so I grew up under communist rule, or that's what you would call it in the West, I guess. So computers were hard to come by, yeah. Right? So I was 10 years old when I was first exposed to computer games, which is old by today's standards. Mm-hmm. And I was immediately in love with that. And I learned programming because back in those days, computers came with programming manual.
Came with a book, yeah.
Yeah, they came with books that you had to study. And so I don't know, I learned BASIC as a 10-year-old. And then I moved on over, through Pascal and assembly language and C and C++. And I spent all my teenage years programming. And I always wanted to be a game developer, but I always thought, well, it's kind of unrealistic. Mm-hmm. Also, Germany was not exactly a great location to be a game developer back then. But then when I was in university, there was suddenly an opportunity. There were 3 game studios in Berlin out of the blue. And so I immediately applied. And I said, okay, I'll do whatever. I don't care, right? I work for free. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter. I just
whatever it takes to
get
in.
Whatever it takes. I'm a student. I'm in university, but I want to be a game developer, and so I got my first job in the industry, and then I've been part of a couple of different companies. I've worked on a couple of different games, and at some point I graduated actually. And then I founded my first own company, because that's the other thing I always wanted to do.
Yeah, make your own company.
It was like, in one sense, it was kind of a step backwards, mm-hmm. right? Because I was part of bigger teams. I was making bigger games up to that point. And suddenly I was, with a couple of friends and we had to, make smaller games. But we got to do our own stuff, which was pretty cool. So in those days, we did games for the Nintendo DS, mm-hmm. for instance. And we also had a game engine for the Nintendo that was licensed by other studios.
Well, that's a perfect background to get yourself into, what you're doing now, which was Albion Online. So before we get back into more stories, I do want to talk a little bit about, specifically with Albion Online, the network situation, because this is something that we hear a lot of players discussing. It's like, they're like, fix the lag, and why is this like that? And you're like the right guy to go to for this. Can you tell me a little bit about how at one point you were working on a system that would allow for like different zones to be controlled by different locations, and that they would all still be connected together, but not on a centralized node?
That was one of the very early things we did, believe it or not. So we had this idea of one world, one server, and of course we were aware that ping would be bad for some people. So we thought, okay, maybe we can distribute the server across the world. And very early, right, even before the alphas, even before you joined, we did have a setup where we had some of the areas in Europe, mm-hmm. and some of the areas in the United States. So the 2 server locations, and you could literally walk over from one server to the other, right? You would not see the difference. There would be a loading screen and the other.
Same as now.
Same as now, just that your ping would change
right.
dramatically. And that was one of the downsides of that concept. It was not really transparent for the players. That's one thing we realized, right? It's kind of fun, you have everyone in the same world, but now you still have to encourage the European players to play in the European regions, and you have to encourage the American players to play in the American regions, and you have to explain to them which region is which and why the ping is suddenly changing, and there were lots of technical problems with that as well. So we had to jump through a number of hoops to even make that work. Sometimes it still didn't, because there was a transatlantic connection involved, and if that connection had problems, then the entire game had problems. So we had to do a lot of things technically to make this more stable and resistant to outages. But in the end, we dropped the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because even though we put a lot of work into that.
You're telling me, like, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people about the work that went into that. This is not lip service. You guys really tried to make it a one world server for everybody, and did so much work on it.
It was a journey, and in the end, the reason we dropped it was because it wasn't really worth the trouble, to be honest. The experience for the players, and that's the only thing that counts in the end, was not that great.
I remember, like, so when there was like Dauntonsea and Kingsport and Queensport and stuff like that, I believe there was some like different server locations still even then.
There was.
Because you'd go from one like area to the next, and you'd go from like, for me, going from 17 ping to 119. Like,
and people would notice that, and have questions, and then you have to start explaining to them that, like, this is a European area, and behind this gate there's an American, but what does it have to do with anything in the game, really? Right?
You have a whole other sort of problems, and it's a lot of problems to solve for how much game.
Yeah. And we did have the same discussion again when we opened the Asian server, and now we have a European server as well. So there was a very, very serious discussion whether we should revisit that concept and say, look, one game world, can we like travel between these worlds somehow? It doesn't have to be every area or something like that. Maybe there's like a harbor where you can ship over or something. We did have all of these ideas, right? And we did make a technical concept for that. So we had I and my team, we sat down very, very seriously and earnestly, and we made a concept what would be required to make all of that work. The bottom line, however, was it will be a lot of work just to end up with more or less the same game that we already have. A little worse, probably.
So I think it was a good idea, honestly, in the end, to make multiple servers and just focus on making the gameplay for everybody as close to equal as possible, so that when you're playing in Asia on Albion Asia, you have the same kind of connection that somebody playing in Europe connecting to Albion Europe has, that somebody playing in America has the same connection that they have in Albion Americas. And so everybody has this really tight connection. And that has allowed for some gameplay elements to change as well. Now there's less stand time with weapons. Now there's less cast time. You can actually have a higher skill interpretation. It lets people play the game in a tighter way.
Yeah. What players may not be aware of is that how much you have to design for a certain ping, actually, right? It is part of the game design. When you make an MMO with one server location, you are aware that people have a ping of around 120 to 150, most of them. So we designed the game in a way so that this ping would be perfectly normal and perfectly playable. And that has an influence on a lot of things, including the design of abilities, the timing of pretty much everything in the game. So but roughly if you have a 150 ping, it means whenever you do a click on your screen, it takes at least these 150 milliseconds to reach any other player's screen. So that is a bit limiting in regards to abilities and Twitch gameplay. Right. So yeah, having separate locations has now allowed us to relax some of the rules that we had, and it gave our designers a bit more freedom designing new abilities, and especially like skill shots and things like that.
You see, you see a lot of newer weapons that are being developed that have a lot higher skill ceiling, and that's really cool to see. And a lot of that, I believe, is because it allows you to just interact with the server faster and interact with your opponent and react faster to what they're doing. And that is really, really cool. When you look at, like, say, the Phase Scale row, for example, which gives you 3 different options, that kind of thing is just a much higher skill expression than just hitting this and waiting, and then it goes off. So you can see it in the gameplay design, and it's really cool. But I do have you here, and we don't get to talk about this, and I know a lot of players out there have no idea how Albion came about, but you were there. You're there from the very beginning. There were, what, like 5 of you guys who started in the very beginning?
Mm-hmm. Pretty much. I had founded my own company 6 years earlier, roughly, right? So I graduated from university. I started my first own games company. I had done games before. I had a lot of experience in games, but I wanted to have my own company. And so we did small time stuff, right? And one day a guy came to our doorstep almost, who had an idea, a concept for an online game, and who wanted to provide the funding to some degree. It was not a huge amount of money, but it was definitely enough to get an interesting project going. And you probably know him under the forum name Korn. He was the person who had this idea. He was looking for a team to build this game with. He was looking all over Germany, talking to different companies, different players in the market. And in the end, he went with us. So with my little team, my little company. Because I guess we somehow clicked, right? I essentially told him, well, that is a great idea. But what we really need to do is we need to build a prototype right now, right? We need to build something playable really fast, right? Like, give us 3-4 months. And in 4 months, we should have a playable version of this, which is not going to look great, right? Which is going to look very primitive, but it will either prove or disprove that we can make this technically and as a team, and it will prove or disprove your design ideas for this game. And that's what we went with, right? We made a deal. We worked on this prototype together, and it went great, right? We really clicked.
Yeah.
The game looked a lot better than we had anticipated. And at the end of that prototyping phase, we founded Sandbox, and I wound down my old company, and took most of the people with me, right? So my old company, we were 3 founders, 2 of which, me included, joined SBI. We took some of our employees. We took a lot of people from our network. And many of them are still working here, right? I'm super proud of that.
That is amazing that so many people still work here after so long. This has just been a phenomenal week hanging out with all of you, getting to meet people face to face. Yes, we've talked before and gotten to have some wonderful discussions, but getting to meet people face to face and spend this time together has just been super valuable to me and just an incredible experience. And I'm looking forward to doing it again. So David, thank you so much for this time. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again.
Likewise.
All right, and that is going to be it for our interview today. And we'll be back again with more shows in the future. Thanks for watching.